Hello, Azure Platform Engineering friends, and welcome to a new episode of the AVE podcast. My name is Mark Scholman, and this time I have with me on the show again, Jack Tracey. In this show, we're going to talk about Azure Verified Modules. Jack, for those who aren't familiar with you or haven't got your introduction from the last episode, can you quickly introduce yourself and what you're doing in Microsoft?
Of course. No, thanks for having me back, Mark. So, my name is Jack Tracey. I'm a senior cloud solutions architect here at Microsoft. And some of you may know me from projects like Azure Landing Zones, which was our previous episode. Do go and check that one out. And I also lead the initiative called Azure Verified Modules and subscription vending and a few other things around Microsoft that we release as open source guidance and tooling here at Microsoft. Been here about 4.5 years.
Nice. Thank you for your introduction, Jack. And today's topic, Azure Verified Modules. As with everything that I always ask my guest first, what is it and why should I use it? What is Azure Verified Modules?
It's a fantastic question. So yeah, let's first get the abbreviation out of the way, right? So AVM, or Azure Verified Modules. It's really Microsoft's opinionated and stood behind approach to infrastructure as code modules. Today, that is just in Bicep and Terraform as languages through choice. But that's not to say that it's to stay that way. We may choose to add other languages in the future, but Terraform and Bicep are something we see used commonly across most of our customers. Probably 80-90% of our customers use those languages. So we picked those to start with. And what we did when we created AVM is, as per the previous episode when we talked about Azure Landing Zones, that's all about helping you get your tenant set up and how you should do best practices in terms of management groups and policies and subscription organization and all of those things. But then once we solved that problem, or we solved the majority of that problem, all of our customers were then like, that's great, but how do we accelerate the deployment of our workloads and our applications and our services? How do we solve that problem? You look at various documentation and there's code snippets and examples, and they're of differing quality depending on what product or what service. There's lots of blogs out there that have lots of different examples. And also if you go to like the Terraform registry or the Bicep registry that in its early days, there were just lots of different code from Microsoft that had differing quality levels and didn't really have a sort of a standard set of features and implementation options and standard ways to consume those modules. So what we thought inside of the team was, this isn't good enough. And we worked closely with the product groups from both the Azure Terraform product group and the Azure Bicep and ARM product groups. So work closely with Alex, who I know you've had on as a guest in the past. So me and Alex spent many evenings chatting away about AVM. And what we did was we brought together the best minds in infrastructure as code around Microsoft and went, let's write what a good module looks like in both Bicep and Terraform, and then stand behind it as Microsoft as this is how it should be done. And this is how every module should be constructed in the same way so that everybody who's using the project gets a familiar experience. They have a good support life cycle, because that's a really important thing as well. Lots of people create modules and publish them, but whether they're supported long term is another question. So that's a key challenge we wanted to solve. Just do the right thing as Microsoft. Like, this is our line in the sand. Microsoft stand behind these modules, and they're all going to be owned by Microsoft employees who are SMEs in that resource.
Nice. So you mentioned opinionated, and that I wrote it quickly down because what does that mean? Because opinionated, if I go to the AVM, there is the minimal set, the large parameter set, and the well-architected framework aligned parameter set. So there are different opinions, so to speak, that could be chosen from. What is opinionated mean from Microsoft perspective? Because there's also cost involved in that, because everything is so redundant, high SKU, because it should be implemented with the well-architected framework. Mostly of the time, those are features that cost additional money. So can you elaborate a little bit more on the opinionated part of it?
Absolutely. So we at Microsoft are on a real drive to make our customers secure and reliable and resilient and performant by default, right? So when you consume anything from any of our consumption methods, whether that's the portal or whether directly in the API or via Terraform or Bicep, whatever that is, we want to make sure that you're doing that in the most secure, resilient, and sort of performant way. Now, obviously, we have the well-architected framework, which has its 5 pillars. And one of those pillars is cost. And unfortunately, that's the one that we've chosen not to align to in the AVM modules, but for good reason, because we want to prioritize performance, reliability, security, and operational excellence. We want to make these modules, when you consume it and you blindly copy and paste, or you get an answer from an AI LLM that's like, here's some code to go and deploy this. We want that to give you an AVM module that we know by default out of the box is going to show up pretty well in a WAF score, right? If you were to scan it for WAF compliance, we want it to be further towards the green and the high scores than the red side. We've done that obviously for many reasons, but obviously we want to make our customers by default have the best experience possible. That does sometimes mean that you'll have expensive SKUs deployed or multiple instances of something deployed, or everything will be spread across availability zones if they're zone redundant resources. But you can change all of those things via the input parameters, right? So nothing's hard coded, nothing's like you can't change it. You can absolutely change that configuration of those resources via the input parameters or variables, depending on which language you're using. But yeah, we wanted to do that so that it was something that customers knew what they were getting. Like, it wasn't just we're going to use AVM because we fancy it. We're going to use AVM because they're worrying about making sure they're WAF compliant and they're tested and they're secure and resilient and performant on our behalf. So we don't have to worry about doing that. So it's almost like offloading a part of the responsibilities as platform teams to go, we haven't got to go and build all of these things. And I think that's actually another really good reason why we built AVM, going back a little bit, is we saw so many customers building their own modules. And even within their own organizations, we saw so many customers, different teams within a customer, building the same modules for like a storage account or a VNet or a virtual machine. And they all did it differently. And what that meant is that they had no code consistency, no quality, and it became hard for them to maintain and manage. And we saw lots of teams get to sort of 20, 30, maybe 40 modules. And then they'd be coming to us and be like, how do other customers do this at scale? Because we've got 20, 30 modules now and we can't keep up with maintaining them, patching them, increasing API versions, putting in new features. And our answer to that is, well, don't do that anymore. Let us as Microsoft do that. You can then just worry about configuring and putting these different Lego blocks together, right? And we'll talk about this in a second, but the 2 types of AVM modules that sort of help this come to light a little bit.
Yep. So, and then one thing, because I said default and well-architected framework aligned, it's not the same, right? Default is the minimum set. So just to explain also to the listeners that if you use a default set and well-architected framework actually suggests you to use private endpoint, if you use the defaults with the minimum set, it will not deploy a private endpoint for you. It will just use the bare minimals that are required to deploy that particular resource or pattern, right? Just to make things.
But also, so that default input set will be things like name, location, and zone. So we've made conscious decisions. So we're very focused on resiliency at the moment as a team and across Microsoft. And what that means is that by default, if you deploy something like Azure SQL or Azure Firewall, that's going to deploy across all the availability zones by default, right? You're not going to have to use the WAF align parameter set or inputs to get it to do that. It will do it by default, or should do it by default. It's something we're working on in getting coverage across all of the modules. But that's so that, out of the box, you get a good resilient deployment. Now, obviously, you can override that with the input parameters, but one important call out is around zones, right? So you think about a virtual machine, right? It's a zonal resource. You can't deploy a VM across 3 availability zones. You can put it in 1. So what we've done for that is made it a required input parameter. So if you declare that module out of the box, it's going to ask you for an input of like, which zone do you want to put it in? Because we want customers to be thinking about their zone placement, not just always picking 1. We could have defaulted it to 1. We could have defaulted it to 3. We could, but we want customers to think about that. So instead of just saying, I want a VM, put it in that region, we go, no, where do you want it? Like, do you want it in zone 1, 2, 3? You say. Or you may just decide to make it a regional VM, right? And say, I don't care where it goes, put it anywhere. But that's a conscious decision that we want you as the user to make as a consumer of a zonal resource.
Yeah.
Because again, from Microsoft's perspective, we want to make sure that you're thinking about reliability and resiliency from the start.
Exactly. Yep. Good call out. Thank you. So you also already mentioned the different type of modules. So let me introduce them, and if you can elaborate on them. I've seen resource type of modules and pattern kind of modules. So of course, can you elaborate on what they're doing for me and how should I use those?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's even a third now, right? There's utility, but they're sort of in
Yeah.
preview. So I'll give you a teaser on that one in a second.
Yes.
So AVM has a library of modules in the respective registries, right? So the Bicep modules are published to the Bicep registry, and when you go into VS Code and you type BR public, that's where it's going. And the Terraform modules are published to the HashiCorp registry, and you can reference those directly from there. Now, when you go to those registries, you need a way of picking, what you need. Like you may need a full-blown architecture that's a 3-tier web app and everything's, wrapped into one super module. And that's something we would refer to as a pattern module, right? So it's deploying multiple instances of resource modules to deliver you a pattern or an architecture. So they're fairly flexible. They can deploy, anything from one tier of an app tier of an application or a workload. Like that may be a load balancer with a VM scale set and maybe an app gateway and a few other bits and pieces. Or that could be something as full-fledged as your landing zones, right? And all of its resources that go in it. Like really the choice is the module owner when they're creating those. But using pattern modules should be made up of resource modules. And our resource modules, probably the best way of thinking about them is Lego blocks, right? Individual Lego bricks. They are a single resource. So a single instance of a resource in Azure, but not to a silly level, right? Not to the ultimate level. So if we take the virtual machine as an example, from an API perspective, a virtual machine is pretty useless in Azure on its own, right? It's nothing.
No.
But to make a VM work, you need a NIC, you need a disk, you need to put it in a subnet. You might need, you need the OS configuration itself, as in the virtual machine, and stitching those things all together. So what we've done with our resource modules is when you deploy a VM module, you get disks, NICs, you get to put it in a subnet, all of those things. But it's a complete resource. So when you finish deploying the virtual machine resource module, you have a working VM and it's in a subnet that you said to put it in. But it won't create the virtual network. It won't create the subnet. It won't do those things. You need to deploy the other resource module for the virtual network to get your subnet and all of those things stood up. So they follow the API schema type, so the RP and the name. So that's how you would track them. So it'd be like Microsoft.compute/virtual machine, and that's how you would find the modules.
Yeah, so some other methodology that I heard a few weeks ago was they use we have recipes and we build menus out of them, right? So that's like what I like a good sample of how do I need to look at these kind of things like resource modules and pattern modules. Well, the pattern is the full menu and it contains some recipes and that will actually create all the dishes and stuff like that. So it's a nice abbreviation.
I've always gone down the Lego brick route, right? You've got your individual Lego bricks for the resource module, and you can either get a full-blown house or just a wall or just a wheel of a car, right, from a pattern module, right? So there's many ways that keep them coming. I love the way that people describe these. So if everybody got them, put them in the comments. It'd be amazing to hear what people are referring to them as.
And what so you already mentioned utility modules. What can I expect from utility modules?
Yeah, so utility modules actually came out of a module request from Alex Frankel. So Alex Frankel wanted to build an AVM module to not actually deploy any resources, right? He actually wanted to do some data manipulation of URLs and endpoint FQDNs for some Azure environments that are available. And something that unfortunately they're not able to do as quickly in the language service today, but they'd be able to build a module that would do the interpolation and spit out some strings and some outputs that would be useful for users in the environments. And we were like, okay, that's an interesting one. It's a really good use case. So we've now in draft, if you go to the AVM website, which is aka.ms/AVM, and the same principle applies to the last episode. If you can think of the short link, aka.ms/AVM/something, it probably exists. So like you could go to aka.ms/avm/waf and you'd find all of the stuff that we've just talked about WAF. So that would exist. But yeah, so going back to utility modules, they are modules that don't deploy any Azure resources, but they might do some data manipulation or a function that you might want to reuse multiple times across an estate. So without you having to copy and paste the same block of code, you can call a module to do that thing. So we've got some guidance in the specification that says what they should be. They are currently preview or draft, so we're going to try them out and see how they work. But it may evolve. But right now we're saying they can't deploy a resource, but they could do an API lookup to something and pass data between two resources or two modules or two different patterns or whatever. So another common use case is, that we've seen is doing some data manipulation of certain data types between, from one API, putting it into a format that can be consumed by another resource module. And we're really excited to see what's going to come of them. Deployment scripts are also able to be used in utility modules. So you might need a utility module that does, I don't know, like a post action, let's call it that, right? Because a bicep, unfortunately doesn't have a post operation like sort of method today. So you might want to, you might want to start or stop a VM, right, via a module. Crazy use case, but like we're just talking theoreticals here. You could create a utility module that exposed hidden deployment script that would start and stop a VM that you could call from a bicep deployment if you wanted to, right? I don't know why you would want to do that, but like that's the sort of things that you could think about doing. Registering resource providers is another great way of thinking about it sometimes as well, like some post operations like that. In Terraform, you've got the beautiful new provider of AZ API, which you can actually do those post and other HTTP, those other API actions in and verbs. So yeah, you don't need it there. But again, in Terraform, there's other use cases that you might want to do some calls to other providers, do some data manipulation, and then pass that back in. Or like a really common one that we think is going to come very soon is a naming module. Like help me name my modules, right? And that's like, it's a minefield. We're very cautious of naming modules because everybody has their own opinion on names. That's why you'll notice in all the AVM modules, we ask you to put in a name. We don't put in anything. It's like you choose because we don't want to get involved in the naming conversation. So yeah, that's a good one, but it's a good use case of a utility module as well because it doesn't deploy anything. It's just generating a name.
Nice. That's cool stuff. I will look into it because I haven't seen it yet, so I will look into it.
None exist just yet, but watch out. Alex Frankel will probably be the first utility module owner. So yeah, it's on its way.
Cool. All right. Nice. And in the last episode, we talked about Azure Landing Zones. How does this integrate into Azure Landing Zones? Is it supplying? Is it like supplying the help and implementation of Azure Landing Zones? How is the relation between AVM and ALZ?
Yeah, no, so it's a really good question, and as I mentioned, sort of towards the beginning, like it's built by the same people, or some of the same people that build and maintain ALZ. So myself and Matt White, and a number of other members of the team who have been involved in ALZ throughout the years are now involved in AVM, right, as a sort of the next thing we're helping to get off the ground, as well as a load of fantastic colleagues from around Microsoft, right? So it should be said that AVM module owners are all Microsoft FTEs. That is a bit of a limitation today on purpose, that anybody can contribute and add code and put in pull requests, but the owner has to be somebody in Microsoft. And that's so that we can uphold the support statement, right? So that I can chase that person internally over Teams or go to their manager and be like, hey, this person's got an issue logged and they're not replying to it, like they need to do it, or we're going to orphan their module, right? So that's why the owners have to be an FTE today, but anybody can contribute code, and we see so many people from the community contributing PRs all the time, which we love to see, and please keep that coming. But going back to that question around where does it fit with Azure Landing Zones, we have Azure Landing Zones that helps you in the ready stage of Cloud Adoption Framework, right? So you've got plan, adopt, ready. And then when you get to the adopt phase, like you actually want to deploy some resources, you've got your landing zone set up and you've got everything there. You now want to actually deploy resources into your landing zone subscriptions that you've got there. This is where we see AVM fitting the most, right? Because it's a catalog of any resource, various patterns that you can use to deploy your architecture or your application or your service or your workload, whatever you want to call it, as fast and as quickly and as promptly as possible that aligns to Microsoft best practices out of the box, right? That's where we see it fitting. However, we are actually rewriting some of our solutions. So the next version of the Azure Landing Zones Terraform release that we're working on will be built from AVM modules. So
Exactly.
that's going to be that. And the ALZ Bicep version that I wrote many years ago, that is well used and adopted out there, we're actually going to rewrite that in a couple of weeks. And before Christmas, we're going to release a new version of ALZ Bicep that's built from AVM
Nice.
modules. So
And that are the accelerators, right? That we talk about, the
indeed,
landing
yeah.
zone accelerators that are actually then under the hood. Now it's like a compiled module and references in a folder structure, but that will
Exactly.
all be uh,
Change to
refactored
use AVM
to
modules. Because it makes
nice.
it easier from a maintenance perspective from us, right?
Absolutely.
And instead of us implementing a new feature in one tiny module that a load of people use, we can implement it in a bigger module that thousands of people use, and everybody benefits, right? So it's a better life cycle for everybody to follow. So we see it fitting in the Azure Landing Zones journey mainly for the application teams or the workload teams. That's generally where we want it to help. But it can certainly help your platform teams building the platform and delivering services there. But yeah, mainly for application teams or developer teams to have a library of modules to go from.
That is very nice. I'm looking forward to that the refactor cycle because
There's
that will
an
be
open issue on the repo. Go and have a look on the ALZ Bicep. There's an issue that you can see there with our plans about how we're going to do it and what the plan. Lots of people have put in comments and suggestions on how they'd like to see it done. So yeah, there'll be sure to be some preview releases, I would imagine, in a month or so. So keep your eyes
nice.
out.
I will definitely. So you already quickly touched upon contributing and creating modules as community into the registry or as MVPs. So you mentioned it's only now a Microsoft show. Are there any plans? Can you already elaborate on that, or is this something that is not fleshed out yet and need to be
it's
discussed?
it, it's something we want to do, right? It's something we all actively want to do within the team, the AVM core team. The limiting factor is that trade off between all of our customers want the guarantee that these modules will be supported, right? And if they log a ticket with Azure support, they want it to go to somebody that's going to help them fix with that. The risk
Yeah.
of opening up the modules to be owned by non-Microsoft employees is we lose that traceability and that tracking path through, the organizational hierarchy that we have at Microsoft. Which is why I think for the foreseeable, we will certainly see all modules have to have their owners as Microsoft FTEs.
Yeah.
However, that doesn't mean that MVPs or other folks in the community that are not MVPs or people who are just super passionate about infrastructure as code, that doesn't mean that they can't create modules and do it. So we had right from day one, we had a fantastic community member, actually two that were really keen adopters from one from the Nordics and one from New Zealand, who effectively saw the specs, saw some of the repos, and went, I've got loads of modules. I'm going to rewrite all of mine to be aligned to the AVM specifications. And then I'm going to harass Microsoft over LinkedIn or people that I know who are working on the project, get them to own the module. And then we, as the owner inside of Microsoft, would create the repo and do all the governance activities that go along with that, which are behind the scenes. And then they would put in pull requests straight away and boom, here's all the code. Here's everything you need. We would check it past the test, meet the quality bar, do all of the validation checks, and then boom, technically they've written most of the module, but
Nice.
actually it's still a Microsoft, somebody in Microsoft still owns it, is responsible for it and accountable for it, but it's contributed and maintained mainly by people outside. So we do have that model where it can work. It just requires a bit of a connection with a friendly Microsoft person that maybe a friend,
Yep.
a colleague, somebody you're working with on a day-to-day basis. That you can do that with. So there's a new resource just been launched in preview called Managed Dev Pools. I don't know if you've seen that
Yep.
announced.
Yep.
Those modules already exist. They were both written by MVPs who approached us and went, we'll write this. We want to have a module for this in AVM. Can you just be the owners? So Jared, one of my colleagues in the AVM team, took on the ownership of one of the modules, and somebody else in the core team took on the ownership of the bicep module, and boom, 2 PRs came in. They did all the work.
Yeah.
We checked them over. Bam, like the modules are there and published. So it can work, and it does work. It just is
Nice.
a few more steps. So yeah, please do raise. And even if you haven't got that connection with somebody inside of Microsoft, raise a proposal, right? So all of the module proposals are open source. They're all tracked via GitHub issues,
Yep.
aka.ms/avm/module proposal. Like I told you, there's a
There
link
you
for
go.
everything. But if you create that and you can say, look, I'm willing to be a contributor or willing to get involved with this, we will then triage that inside the Microsoft community who are owning modules. And somebody might go, yeah, do you know what? I'll put my hand up. I'll own that. And they might reach out to you over LinkedIn or email or GitHub and say, hey, let's catch up and you can work together to get that module published. So we've seen that happen a few times as well. So even if you don't know the route to get the module published, get it logged as a proposal so we can start tracking it and trying to find somebody who will own it and work with you, which is what we want at the end of the day. But yeah, it's been a whirlwind, right? AVM's only really been here for, this time last year, I was in a meeting room in Reading with a whiteboard sketching it up, and we were talking about it, and we took a load of existing projects. So you might have heard of Carmel in the past, or the Common
Yep.
Azure Resource Module Library. So Alex, Erica, Chris, Raina, like all of the team that have been building Carmel over the many years, we've now brought Carmel into AVM. So you would have noticed over time that Carmel has not got any modules anymore. They're all AVM modules now. We completed that migration around November time, but they're fundamental and founding members of the AVM project, right? So we have them. Literally came off a call with them 2 hours ago from our weekly sync. So we all sync. We all have a big team meeting, and we got everybody together about a year ago today in one big room, and we're like, what does good look like? What does a good module look like? And we wrote up the whole site and started with the specs. And then we've really evolved it from there. And yeah, something like nearly 300 modules across both languages right now in the space of 12 months. It's been crazy. And I think, from some telemetry that we've seen, we're approaching, sort of 500,000 deployments of all of our modules across the estate. So these are used in anger in many customers. And yeah, like it's great to see how quickly they've been used.
And then they have telemetry enabled, because most customers that I have, their first thing parameter that we describe is disable telemetry, because we don't want Microsoft.
Yeah, exactly. Like most people
Because
turn it off. Exactly. So like for the
I don't
ones
know
that
why,
leave
but
it on, so we sort of say you could probably times it by a third again about the people that do turn it off.
yeah,
But hey, that's everybody's choice, right? Everybody's welcome to opt out of telemetry. It just helps us see where people are using it and what's going on. But even from the ones that we can see, yeah, we've got some crazy numbers of deployments, and it's growing. Like we're still going up that bell curve really quickly, and I think there's more to come still, which is fantastic. And Terraform's got such a way to go in terms of more modules being created. We've got so many in development that are really close to coming out. But obviously, the great work that the Carmel team did is they got pretty much every resource covered that you would need in a bicep sense. So that's why in the bicep side, we have so many more modules available, because we've just transpiled and converted lots of existing modules into fit with the AVM specifications. But in Terraform, we're writing a lot of this from scratch. So that's why it's taking a little bit longer, but we're getting there, right? I think there's something like 50 modules now, and more are being developed every week. So soon that gap will be closed.
awesome. That's really nice. And so what I've seen at companies over the last year is they built, yeah, we've got our own registry, we've got our own modules, and we do it this way. And if I need to go back to those customers, and should I instruct them to leave it as is and start looking and migrating to AVM? Or is it something like you can choose either both, either or the other, and then just go forward? And then should you actually, or should you say, okay? Because what I usually see in those companies is they are so purposed around their design standards and structure that it's as an external who's coming in, it's hard to use those modules because they have abbreviations and everything, and then everything is comprised together by dev environment, by environment type, prefix, postfix, and then some kind of priority or data classification, and then everything under the hood is happening. It's very nice. It's I call it the unicorn world thinking, but for me as an external who is helping those customers, it's like I don't know what I get out of it when I deploy this. And with AVM, it's pretty clear.
Yeah, we try to
So
keep it.
what is the way forward for these customers?
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic question, right? And one that we were sort of discussing today as a core team, more around the topic of inner sourcing. So people who like AVM but then want to bring it inside because of various reasons, and we can talk about that if you want in a second. But to answer your question around what happens if I'm an existing customer who's written a load of modules and is using a lot of modules, but now we're looking at AVM and like, should we use this? I think the right answer is start trialing it, start MVPing it, start POCing it side by side, right? Because there will be some changes. And for Bicep, there's less obviously risk changing because you can sort of use both side by side and
Combine.
it's very easy from a Terraform perspective. You obviously got the state file in the way, so the state file will be there, but you can use the moved block right in your resource declaration, say hey, this is moved to this, and like it's a lot easier than it used to be right in Terraform. So it's certainly possible, and something we've seen a lot of customers, a lot of large customers actually do this, moving away from a previous Terraform project that they don't want to use anymore, and going towards AVM. But then, how would I pitch it to them? How would I go to that customer and say, like, how you should do this? The key thing for me is that time and effort that it takes them and the team maintaining those existing modules to just do the basics, right? Like upgrade API versions, add new features as they get rolled out. Like the amount of cycles in sprints they must waste doing things that we as Microsoft should be helping our customers, do for them and get there. And that's what we're doing with AVM. You imagine if they stop doing those parts, but then they could even still build their own modules, right? And follow the AVM specifications. They could build their own pattern modules. And this is what a lot of customers do. So they consume our own registries, like the public registries for resource modules and maybe some pattern modules they like. But then they follow the specifications and the rules and the guidance of the site and then build their own pattern modules effectively over the top that add their regulatory compliance controls over the top, or the way that they deploy a certain architecture over the top, so that they say to the application teams or the development teams, you use our modules, but under the hood, they may have written 20% of the code instead of 100% now, right? So they've saved so much time of accelerating value to the business, not having to worry about maintain all of these individual Lego blocks and snowflakes. And then go, oh, well, Microsoft look after X, Y, and Z. We have to write this tiny 20% of code to stitch it all together and apply our customizations, maybe lock down some variables that we don't want people to be able to use, or certain set of values we only want to expose because AVM may expose a bigger list. And that's how teams have been adopting it, and then having that mixed sort of use. Because what that actually says to application teams is, you can go and build however you want to build, following that ALZ guidance of subscription democratization, right? The application team should be empowered to deliver however they want to. As soon as you start forcing an application team or a development team that they can only use a module that's been written by this team, you start getting into political challenges, right? Because somebody in the company doesn't like the way that person over there has written that module, and then they start creating shadow IT. Another good selling point with AVM is for internal teams who have been building modules is you no longer have to go into those fights. You can just blame Microsoft for the way it's written and the way it is, right? And you can raise an issue and they can raise an issue, but you're going to get consistency, you're going to get quality, you're going to get testing, you're going to get versioning, all things that we actually see a lot of internal platform teams who build modules for their internal customers to use not do very well, or if they are doing, they've got a massive team that could be better purpose doing other things, adding more value to the business. So, we've I think those things alone mean you should use it as an option in your tool bag to build solutions, and then over time, you may slowly only use AVM. Or you may say, actually, we're always going to need our own shim, our own little layer that makes it our way. But that's fine because you're now only maintaining this much rather than this much, right? You're maintaining 10% instead of 100%.
Yep, and that's actually what I also do is I create a new main.bicep. The first thing is to create the parameters of some variables and then module AVM something and then redirect it to the registry and start filling in the defaults that I need and then parameterize that what should be allowed to change. But if you look at certain testing tools like PS Rule or maybe bench press, is this something that so if I look at myself, I don't use these tools that much anymore. If I look at ARM, I had a lot of linters and testing and stuff like that. But now I see myself when I'm using that, it's so little code that I write. What is the value of using these tools still? Is there any value, or can you provide me? No, you should do like A, B, C, or D, and then you have the whole set completed, and that's how you should do it. Can you maybe elaborate on that? How should you integrate those tools in the usage of AVM? Because that's for me something where I personally struggle with because everything is already shift left, right? And what should I invest time there, or is it something that is
so we actually
it depends.
Yeah,
we also a nice answer.
Yeah, we use PS Rule in AVM Bicep to test the modules for WAF alignment, and we're writing new PS Rule rules all the time, and the team behind PS Rule are fantastic, and we speak to them frequently to make sure that we're getting those rules added to make sure we're WAF compliant. But I would absolutely say, so if you looked at any of the publishing workflows for any of the modules in the Bicep registry, you'll see that PS Rule is used multiple times in there to check that the module is compliant with the rules in there. But I would definitely say in your own project, so even if you're only consuming the modules directly from the registry and you're writing your own main.bicep to stitch it together, you should definitely use something like PS Rule, because something that you change in a parameter input could make something now not compliant with WAF or a certain security policy or a best practice that you might not have been aware of, right? You might have changed parameter Y and it's changed A, B, C, and D, and you weren't even aware it was going to do that. So that's where tools like PS Rule or Bench Press or in Terraform, TF-Lint, and all of the tools that exist there, that's where they're so important to use at every step of the chain where something might have been edited, because it's fine checking it when it was first checked in, but if you've changed it and then not checked it again, you don't know what you're going to get at the end of it. So we would definitely recommend using it all the way through. And there is some stuff coming in that space. So much like we've got the Azure Landing Zone accelerators that help you do CI/CD for Azure Landing Zone for Terraform or Bicep, Jared and Saif and a number of others in the team are working on an application landing zone generic accelerator. So you can effectively target a subscription and it will spin up CI/CD runners. It will configure your GitHub or ADO repo with branch policies and all of that stuff. Set up your service connections using OIDC and or like identity federation, and give you reference pipelines that we deem best practice. That this is how you should deploy Terraform. This is how you should deploy Bicep in a repo that an application team can literally get, and then they'd be like, right, cool, put my main.bicep in there in a pull request, and boom, off it goes. It does everything. So instead of teams having to reinvent the wheel on how should we set up, what does a good repo look like, and how should we do secrets and authentication and all that stuff, we're working on that, and that's something we hope to get out before the end of the calendar year as well.
Nice. That's really nice. I'm looking forward to that.
So hopefully we'll include things like PS Rule, TF-Lint, and all those things in there, and over time we'll increase the tooling in there to make sure that people are doing good practices. So yeah, I think that's an important note. I just want to go back to another value point of AVM that I think we sort of glossed over because we both obviously use it, and it's easy to gloss over things. One important thing, so not only the well-architected alignment, but also the consistency. So we have something called shared interfaces in AVM. So we talked about private endpoints earlier. Other shared interfaces might be diagnostic settings, customer managed keys, tags, locks, role assignments, all of those things, managed identities. If any of you have worked with the Azure APIs at any length across various resources, you will have discovered, the same way that we have all discovered in the AVM team, that the way that teams implement CMK is not always the same. or the way they implement private endpoints is not always the same. And that makes it really annoying when you're trying to write native Bicep or Terraform to go, oh, well, hold on, I did CMK that way over here, but now in this resource, I have to do it a different way, or it wants something different as an input. So what we've done in AVM for resource modules, we've created standard interfaces, which means a common way that a user has to put the input variables or parameters in to deploy private endpoints, customer managed keys, diagnostic settings, manage identities. And then under the hood, the module owner has to either do nothing or quite a bit of data manipulation to pass in the right values, so that you as a user learns one pattern. You learn to do it the AVM way, and effectively we're putting a very small shim over the top of our APIs, so that from your consumption journey, it's really simple. And you haven't got to look at the docs every time. Like, why does it work like this over here, but not over here? Like, we've solved that problem. We are working with the teams behind the scenes to try and make things better, but that's something we could do right now, instantly, to make it better for everybody very quick.
Consistency, abstract complexity.
Exactly.
That's always a good thing. So you already mentioned something that we should touch upon. Are there any other things that I might have forgotten to ask, or any cool features that I haven't touched upon, or anything that you want to share with us?
One amazing question that we get a lot of times is, why aren't the modules version 1 yet? So any of you who are looking at the modules will all notice they follow semantic versioning, so they're all 0.x.y at the moment. So they're all a 0. Release, and none of them are version 1. Now, people ask this, and this is listed in the FAQ and listed on the website, so you can find this. You haven't got to come back to this specific point in the episode to find this, what I'm saying. It's all documented. It is certainly our plan to go version 1. But when we go version 1, that means that we know that, or to the best of our knowledge, there will not be many more breaking changes to the modules. AVM is still early, right? We're 12, 14 months into the project. We don't know what we don't know yet, right? So we're still getting lots of feedback from, we've already changed the private endpoint interface probably 3 to 4 times, because different use cases come out of the woodwork and we're like, oh, we didn't think about that. That's cool. Let's change it. Let's adapt. And then we have to roll that change out to all the modules. And sometimes that could be a breaking change. So whilst we're a 0. Release, we can make breaking changes fairly easily. It doesn't break your deployment. Obviously, we would suggest you pin to the version that works at the time and upgrade when you feel you need to. But all the time we're 0. We can make those changes pretty easily. As soon as we go version 1, we have to be very careful about making sort of big changes like that. And with good reason.
You could go from 1 to 2.
Yeah, and we could go version 1 to version 2, but people don't like making big changes like that because they get afraid of it. So, and rightly so, there could be some breaking changes there. So we want to be really cautious about doing that. We also want to close the gap on our testing, right? So we've got a lot of specifications and rules written in AVM that says a module should do this and it should look like that and should be, constructed this way. We haven't got complete test coverage for every part of AVM yet. So some of the checks are still manual. So the AVM core team are manually reviewing code for some elements. And that obviously doesn't scale perfectly. So we want to make sure that we've got test coverage for everything in there, or as much as we can, so that we know that we've got, a very quick green tick or a red cross across all of our modules to know if they're compliant with the AVM specification. So that's what we're working on. The final thing is, and I think this is the most important. I'll touch on 2 things. We plan to do, when do we plan to go version 1? It's our intent to do it by the end of this financial year for Microsoft, which has just started. So we're talking this sort of time next year. July, August 2025, that's when we want to really be at the point of we can start releasing version 1 modules, and we can start doing that. 2 questions come from that. Can I use them when they're not version 1? Absolutely. And as you've heard, many people are, and lots of people are in production. And we've got some government and public sector and critical national infrastructure customers that I'm aware of that are even using these to build their production environments out today. So they are being used at anger by large customers. So please don't think that they're not ready to use. And to support that argument, how many customers do you know, Mark, that are using Terraform or were using Terraform or are still using Bicep today when they are or were version 0. Something, right? Terraform's was 0.15 or 0.16, and it had been out for like 3 years before it went version 1. It was still supported. It's still in production, still, generally available. And Bicep today is still a 0. Version, right? Because they've not gone version 1. So,
But it's a translation from something that I specify in a file to an API version, which is supported in Azure. So I got my support on the Azure side of things, and especially if you use non-preview versions in API spec, then at least if my Bicep deployment succeeds and I'm using 0.4.3, that will work for at least next few years. So because it's just an transpile from a bicep to an API in Azure, which is already in production and supported. So that's how I explain it, at least to my customers when we have these kind of discussions. But to be honest, I don't have these kind of talks that often at all. So
fantastic. That's good. That's good because
yeah.
we did have this at the start. It was a lot of conversations like, oh well, it's not
Yeah.
version 1 yet, so we can't use it. And absolutely, you can. And this is documented all over the website. So if any of you do get resistance and your teams don't want to use it because it's not version 1, point them to the website. And if they're still not willing to listen, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'll happily come and speak to any of them and to try and get them sorted.
We'll explain them. Let's go use Azure Use Manager templates and take the learning curve with the personnel and the cost associated with that, and we'll go that route.
Yeah, exactly. Show them the benefit by doing absolutely.
Exactly.
So yeah, no, that's probably the biggest thing to call out. So hopefully by this time next year we'll be version 1 for most of our modules, but they're absolutely safe to use right now. And you can call Azure support or log a ticket with Azure support for any of these modules, and it will find its way to the relevant person, the relevant owner. So fully supported. Go and raise your tickets to your heart content, or just file a GitHub issue on the repo where you found the module.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. That's how I should do it, in my opinion. I didn't even know that you could go through Microsoft support with that even. But
Absolutely,
wow,
you can.
that's nice. Are there any other top of minds that we need to share? Otherwise, we're going to round it up. And I would like to then thank you for your time. I hope everyone have find their value out of this episode. And we'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much, Jack.
Thanks.